Well, it is Sunday, March 19th, 2023, recording the weekly Mixtape weekend review for Monday the 20th. Hope you had a great weekend. We spent it over in Cincinnati, out in the cold, for what was supposed to be the spring thaw soccer tournament for Leo, and it was more of a spring freeze. It was snowing, it was windy, it was cold, but nonetheless, we had a good weekend and we're back. Let's get to the headlines that may or may not be impacting your financial plan and portfolio. And as you can see, I got my notebook in front of me. I did a lot of writing this week, taking notes about what was going on, and really is a continuation of what we talked about last week. So hopefully this week in review, weekly mixtape, will be a little bit shorter than last week. Don't have to go over all of the how banks work and what we're learning, but still continuing to learn more and more about how banks really operate and how fragile the system can be, yet how resilient it is at the same time. But this week, the fallout from Silicon Valley Bank going under continued, spilled into First Republic, another bank that had a lot of pressure on it from a stock market standpoint. The price was down significantly. It was down big on Monday, recovered big on Tuesday, was down the rest of the week. It actually got some inflows from some of the larger banks to help stabilize that bank. And then over the weekend, Credit Suisse is a bank that's been in the news numerous times over the years about being weak and having bad things on their books. There was a proposal, and I don't know at the time of recording if it was accepted, but it looks like UBS is going to be buying Credit Suisse, another big bank that is being stabilized by another, and a lot of fear right now about the banking system and whether or not it's in a bad shape. Is it going to crumble? What happens from there? It definitely probably shows that there are some weak spots in these banks, but are we in another 2008? It's different this time. Will it have the same outcome? We'll have to wait and see. But one of the things that I think it is interesting to look at and think about is, especially with one of the headlines this week of the Federal Reserve opening up lines for banks. So basically, it's being kind of positioned as a bailout. It's not a bailout in the sense that we've seen before, but it's just allowing banks to take some of those bonds that we talked about last week. So remember, some of these banks went out, they bought longer term U.S. bonds, which is a safe play, but they bought them at low interest rates. Interest rates go up, bond prices go down. Not a huge deal if you don't have to sell them. If you can hold to maturity, then you get your principal back and you got your interest, although you got less interest than you could have with current rates. Not a big problem until people need their money back. Banks have to sell those bonds to give the money back when there's runs on the bank like we saw with Silicon Valley Bank. So it's as if the banks, on paper are in real bad shape when you look at their bonds, but if not everybody's asking for all of their money, they're probably okay. So the fear-mongering that's going on, causing people to take their money out, re-examining FDIC insurance and what that means, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, is creating stress. And what the Fed did was basically say, all right, banks, you can use those bonds you have as collateral to access these lines of liquidity so you can give cash to people who need it. So it's not as if they're giving the banks this free money. It's just saying, hey, you've got these bonds on the books. You can use them as collateral. You can access these lines for cash if you need it. Now, what I don't know, and I'm not one of the smartest people in the world, so I don't know what happens as far as that collateral versus dollars now, because whether they repay those loans back or when those bonds come due, they pay the government back. But then what happens at that point if they need those reserves? So there's a lot of messiness there that I don't really have the answers for. Despite everybody's lack of trust in government, understandably, I do think that things will work themselves out. It may mean that they put more money into the system, which is not good for inflation, which we're trying to fight. So a lot of moving pieces here. I think the best course of action, which is usually the best course of action, is to not overreact. Realize that the stories that you're hearing on both sides of the spectrum, the extremes are probably not right. Truth is probably somewhere in the middle, which means you probably don't need to make major changes. If you have more than $250,000 at a bank and you're worried about FDIC insurance, there's some things you can do. You're moving to other banks, titling of it. There's other things you can do to protect those assets without having to pull it out and kind of panic. But nonetheless, at the end of the day, you've got to do what you think is best for you. But I think panic is rarely the right thing. It's not usually the best thing for you. And as we saw in the banking system, a panic with everybody pulling money out is not good for the bank. If everybody had left it in there, the banks would have skirted through and probably been okay. But here we are. There's a lot of concern in the system, so we've got to work through this. I think the government is trying to show that there is no reason to worry about your deposits, so that gives people a little bit more peace of mind to not take money out and not get the banks in trouble. But we'll have to wait and see. So the banking system is a big one that's been talked. I think there are more fearful stories out there that are not true versus the ones that are, but we'll have to wait and see. Extreme story one being, there is an investor that has made some predictions before, it happened to be right a couple of times, who said that he's predicting that Bitcoin will go to $1 million per Bitcoin in the next 90 days. He sees hyperinflation and thinks it's going to happen really, really quick. But what we don't realize is this individual has a lot of Bitcoin saved up. And this is not a pro-Bitcoin, go put your money in Bitcoin scenario, but just why people make these broad, big claims. And on surface level, you could maybe believe what he's saying, but what's his ulterior motive? Well, one, it's to draw attention to himself. There's no accountability, so if he happens to be wrong, which I hope he is, there's no one's going to do anything to him. But even if he's wrong, and his words carry so much weight in the crypto community that it drives the price of Bitcoin up, it doesn't take much for him to be able to recoup the $1 million that he's putting up in the form of a bet, but also to make way more. I saw a stat that said if the Bitcoin moved 4% based off of what is believed that he has in Bitcoin, he would make a bunch of money. So motivation is not necessarily to be right. If he happens to be right, then he's a prophet and he prints money because of that. If he happens to be wrong, but in the right time and has enough people who buy into it, it drives the price up in the short term. He can make a lot of money, he can sell and get out, and we'll never know. So you have to question, what are the motivations behind the individuals that are out there saying these extreme on both sides, not just the hyperinflation, but the other side as well. What are their motivations? And usually there's a hidden agenda, especially when you're looking at social media and the predictions that are out there. So banking system is the big thing. More is going to be coming this week, I'm sure. So that'll be something that will stay in the headlines. Again, I think the best course of action is not to panic. If you have more than the FDIC insurance amount, maybe doing some planning on protecting that and moving things around, or changing titling to make it to where you can get everything under one bank, depending on how much you have in cash. Also, at what point do you take your cash and go to treasuries yourself? So a lot of things to be thinking about that can prevent you from having to panic and do something major. The next thing is Federal Reserve meets this week. So they will be announcing what is believed to be a 25 basis point, a 0.25% increase. There's been some speculation that giving everything on with the banks, which is directly related to the Fed raising rates so quickly, that they might not do anything. But the bettors on Wall Street pricing things in the bond markets think that there is a good chance that they'll raise by 25 basis points. And in some regards, it's almost like they have to because they've said that they were going to. And if they double back, then does it show signs of weakness? Does it take away their credibility? So it's almost like a parent telling their kids, if you do this, I'm going to take something away. The parent may not want to take it away, but the child does it, they have to do it. It's kind of the situation where the Fed's in. So it'll be interesting to see what they do in the short term. If they do raise this time, we'll see what their language is and what they talk about, and if they address the banking situation going on and how they're going to handle things going forward there. So that'll be the other big thing. And let's see what else we got. Political divide. So a good opportunity for politics to come back and play and divide people. There's some tweets out there that former President Trump is expected to be arrested on Monday for covering up some buying out of silencing people that happened. So again, one of the things of all of the doom and gloom headlines that are out there that really trouble me the most, it is the divide amongst all of us in this country along the political lines, that it is so much us versus them. One has to win, one has to lose, instead of realizing that the reality of it is both sides should always be able to come together and compromise, but it's just a really big divide. So I hate seeing this come up and seeing what this might do again to divide people further than what's going on. So that'll definitely be a headline. We'll see what happens. I don't think it'll have much impact on the markets per se, but it'll definitely be something that covers the news line. It'll bring more doom and gloom scenarios to the conversation, which is never fun. But that's what we see a lot of times in the traditional media is the doom and gloom, because that's what gets you to click, that's what gets you to stop on the news channel, and that was what pulls out our emotions, which keeps us engaged, so we can see that the traditional media is selling advertising and making those dollars. But I wanted to end on a high note. March Madness kicked off this week, Thursday and Friday, actually Tuesday, they had the playing games, but some great games, some big upsets, and some games going on this evening as well. So enjoying the first week of March Madness, be excited to see everything goes on. So to me, March Madness is ending us on a positive note for this week's weekly mixtape. So that's it. So you take this information, you apply it to how you think it's going to impact your financial plan and your portfolio. In the long run, we've had tons of events like we're having right now, savings and loans crisis, and in the moment, and every time it is a little bit different, it's never the exact same, but somehow we find ourselves through these, and in the long run, things get back to moving forward and positive. So depending on your time horizon, depending on your goals, depending on how you're positioned, allow that to be kind of the influence and kind of direct you. And obviously, if you have a financial advisor, talk to him or her. If you don't, maybe seek one to get that help. So with that, I will let you get to your week. Hope you had a great one over the weekend. Hope you have a great week coming up. And we'll be back next week to break down what happens this week. Have a good one, and we'll see you all in the next episode.